Well, we've made it into the holiday season, but for many people, this may be the most difficult year to feel thankful for Thanksgiving. At least together we can feel grateful for the signs of a vaccine that's on the way, giving us some weight to the hope for a more manageable year ahead. But this year, even the question of how to celebrate Thanksgiving is fraught with peril. So whether you will be gathering in person or with family on Zoom calls, any family gathering forces us to face the difficulties that lurk in the background that we push aside throughout the rest of the year. Facing who is having health problems, which part of the family is struggling financially, who had a falling out and aren't really speaking to each other. And if you don't have family close enough to visit, that's a little more painful this year too. Thanksgiving was intended to be an opportunity to be thankful, feel thankful, but it doesn't happen automatically. In this complicated, stress-filled reality we're living, gratitude might take some extra effort, but it is totally worth the effort that you give it. Because gratitude, like forgiveness, benefits the giver more than the receiver. Sometimes gratitude just wells up within us when we experience something unexpectedly good. Most of the time, our hearts and our minds are so engrossed with dealing with the daily details that we miss out on recognizing the blessings in the midst of all this turmoil. So we might call it a spiritual practice to learn to practice being grateful in the midst of the turmoil. I don't know if anyone would say that they're grateful for having a serious illness, and yet many realize that they are thankful for the changes that come as they work through these experiences. A new perspective that sort of peels away that list of silly things that we worry about and make time for space in our lives to discover what is truly important to us. So when our routines are interrupted and suddenly we are made aware of the amazing people, the parts of our life that were there all along and we hadn't noticed, when we finally get out on the other side of an illness or a financial setback or a loss in our lives, then it becomes easier to reflect and give thanks. But if we could just learn to stop and do some of that reflection in the middle of the chaos, we might just increase our own joy, experience some ease from the pain. Our story speaks to that today from Scripture as Jesus was engaged in his daily routine of living out God's love in the world, going from place to place. So while on the road, 10 lepers begin to approach him cautiously, keeping their distance. They try to get his attention. Because leprosy was a condition that was met with fear and ignorance. A leper was isolated from all contact with the community. In Leviticus, the law said the leper needs to wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he will cry, "Unclean, unclean." And he will be unclean as long as he has the disease and must dwell outside the encampment of the people. So Jesus sees this group of lepers moving towards him. And he just tells them to go to the priest. And as they turned and went, then they became healed. They followed these instructions, and as they were doing so, they began to realize that the healing was taking place. As they followed, they experienced this healing that was going to change their life, not just their health, but getting their whole lives back. One of them, in this process, as he saw he was beginning to see the signs of healing, turned back to Jesus and thanked him. And this one that turned around was a Samaritan, And Jesus makes sure that everyone notices that he has healed a foreigner, an enemy, a doubly outcast Samaritan leper. He really likes to make the point that God loves our enemies. But this thankful leper is responding in the moment, expressing gratitude to the person that gave him this new hope for life. The other 9 went quickly back to the priest. They would then get a clean bill of health and go home to their families and try to pick up the pieces of their lives as they were before this illness came on them. I suspect that after they got that confirmation of health and settled back into their communities, they would truly be thankful. But one person was able to stop and give thanks right in the middle of the turmoil, before everything was settled and secure. Gratitude and thanksgiving move us beyond the standard expected response, allowing us to experience joy even in times of confusion. Now, research has shown over and over again that people who do, in fact, count their blessings find themselves feeling better, sleeping better, and caring more about others. People who remind themselves daily of the things they are grateful for, consciously every day, show improvements in mental health and physical health. And these results seem to be true whether you're a healthy young adult or an older person with an incurable disease. One of many studies began looking at college students who filled out weekly reports of 5 things for which they were grateful. And another group was made up of older adults with chronic diseases. So they were asked to write down a list of the things that made them thankful. Comparable groups were then asked just to count, the hassles instead of the blessings. They listed the aggravations of finances depleting quickly. And instead of focusing on how rich they were, the members of these groups focused on their poverty. And in the end, the grateful groups felt better about their lives, more optimistic about the prospects for the future. The thankful college students exercised more. The chronically ill adults who focused on their blessings reported sleeping better and waking up more refreshed. The members of the grateful groups were also nicer to their neighbors and more willing to help people with their personal problems. So expressing gratitude, truly being thankful, improves our health and improves our relationships. I think especially now, one way to express gratitude is through trying to repair and rebuild what has been lost, especially in our relationships, especially this year and over the holidays. Brian McLaren has suggested that now more than ever, we need to develop skills of relational peacemaking. He writes about 4 skills that he's learned over the years, beginning with offering comfort. Because when people are under stress, they tend to, behave badly. So one of the ways that we can relieve stress is by offering comfort. We can do so by naming people's stress and pain and offering empathy, some understanding. We might say things like, we are all carrying a lot right now. This is a hard time, and I know you are hurting, and I can't imagine how hard this year has been for you. Just this kind of empathy lifts burdens and helps people act from their better selves. We especially need the skill of differing graciously. We need that a lot right now. When we hear people say something that is false or harmful, it is tempting to say, you are wrong and that is stupid, which just adds to the stress that causes people to dig in their heels and even more self-defense. It's tempting to remain silent and say nothing, but instead we could try something like, well, I just see that differently. We can define ourselves without making our neighbor defensive. We can avoid toxic silence or toxic reactions by simply saying, I understand, and yet I see that differently. I think that this year, this time might be a good time to acknowledge there's a reason why we see things so differently. I think this is part of our problem. You see, 40 years ago, this year, someone shot J.R. Ewing. Not in reality, but on TV. And if you are, say, over 50, you remember that year. That was the spring of 1980, and Dallas was the biggest hit on TV. And in the final cliffhanger in the spring episode, someone shot J.R. Ewing, and everyone talked about it all summer long. Now, that particular summer was the first time that I had ever flown overseas. I went to Singapore to visit my in-laws who were living there, and there weren't many TV stations to choose from back then, and even fewer in English in Singapore. And even there, they were asking, who shot JR? It was quite a summer. But my point is that 40 years ago, people had differing opinions and disagreed on politics and religious beliefs. But basically, everyone had access to the same sources of information. We all heard and read the same basic facts about the events that were happening in the world as we considered our opinions and our perspectives and how we thought. But that is no longer true. Now, today, people can live in the same country, in the same city, in the same family, and not hear the same information. Not be reading the same news. We see things very differently because we are fed opinions as facts. And everything that we see and hear is spun with words that are intended to trigger our emotions and not our good emotions, mostly encouraging fear, engendering more anger than understanding, increasing our stress rather than calm reflection. Our world is now configured to keep us apart. So McLaren suggests that the practice of mourning and lament might be what we need right now. Because many of us are carrying deep grief over real losses. Few of us can find a safe place to speak of our losses. We can help others by going first, by showing and sharing our own loss. If someone asks how you were doing, you might say, I am really feeling a sense of loss right now. And if your friends ask you to say more, you can name your losses. I feel this loss of innocence. I feel some fear that we are losing our norms of honesty and decency in our world. I fear the loss of my job or my friends. And then you can ask them, are you feeling anything similar? Creating this conversational space for mourning our losses can reduce our stress and that sense of isolation that we feel, leaving both sides less vulnerable to becoming angry, more able to make peace. Now, this holiday, this year, might be helped out by agreeing that this is probably not the best time to hash out all the details of where we disagree and where the other person is wrong. There will be time for that, but first, we need time to understand the fear and the pain that lies behind the choices that people make. McLaren shared one example of just expressing some support and reaffirmation when he says, a friend and I were discussing politics and it turned into an argument, and frankly, it was ugly. And when we met up a few weeks later, he said to me, every day since our argument, I have woken up feeling terrible terrible about how I yelled at you, because you are my friend, and I am sorry, and I value our relationship. Expressions of support are needed. I know we see the world differently, but I value you as my coworker, my friend, my family member. If millions of people, however we get together in the weeks ahead, could say these words, maybe the world would become a little bit more peaceful of a place. We have already seen the impact of doing the opposite. So this Thanksgiving, expressing gratitude and understanding in the middle of the turmoil, while so much is still uncertain, might be the healthiest and most hopeful thing that we can do. And of course, we can always sing.